This podcast contains explicit content and is intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Don't say we didn't warn you.
Hi, my name is Madison, and you are listening to Who's Knocking, a true crime podcast. Hello, everyone. So we are back again, and when I say we, I mean me, for a new episode. And yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. Hope you are too. So we're knee deep in October, and that's spooky season, which is the high holidays around here. I love October because, the best part about October is turtleneck season. Sweater weather is one thing, but turtleneck season is my favorite. I live for a good turtleneck. So here we are. So this case today, I'd say, okay, so everybody, all of us are big into the Jeffrey Dahmer story right now because I don't even know what the series is called, but the Jeffrey Dahmer series, the Ryan Murphy Jeffrey Dahmer series on Netflix, has been quite frankly killing it lately and was awesome. And so I think everybody's been like deep diving into Jeffrey Dahmer. I saw recently on I think Instagram, a lot of people were dressing up as Jeffrey Dahmer for Halloween, and people were outraged. And I don't know, I kind of like am not outraged and feel like, isn't the point of Halloween to dress as a monster? And is Jeffrey Dahmer not a monster? I mean, maybe the difference would be that he's actually a real person with real victims, so like maybe that's inappropriate, but I don't know. I kind of feel like people dress as like killers for Halloween. That's like a big thing. Everyone dresses up as like the Scream monster or Freddy and Jason and Michael Myers. They're all killers. I mean, I guess they're fake killers, so maybe that's the difference. You let me know. Are you offended? Are you not? Maybe I should not even be going there, but yeah, fuck it. I honestly think it's a pretty funny costume, so. Anyway, so this story is kind of on the Jeffrey Dahmer train, if you will. This person, I find there to be a lot of similarities with Jeffrey Dahmer, and I'd say this is Germany's Jeffrey Dahmer. Ooh. So I kind of think I'm just going to get right into it. I don't really have much else to say, so let's go. So today we're talking about a man, and please forgive me Germans if I butcher his name. I'm pretty sure I've listened to people talk about him, actual German people talk about him, and I'm pretty sure we call him Joachim. So that's what I'm going to call him, Joachim, spelled Joachim. I would have pronounced it as an English person, Joachim, but we're going to go with Joachim. And this is Joachim Kroll. Okay? Here we go. So Joachim Kroll was born on April 17th, 1933 in Upper Silesia, which is in the far east of Germany. Okay? So 1933 to 1943 was generally considered the era of the German Reich. So this is Hitler territory. And this is when the Nazi Party kind of began to take over, and Hitler took power, and he started to force his evil dictatorship. And so that's like where Joachim grew up. What a world. Joachim's father was a coal miner, and his mother, I guess, minded the children. It didn't say explicitly that she was a stay-at-home mom, but it didn't say that she had a job, so that's where we are. And they had 9 children. Joachim was number 6 out of 9. Now, in this time and place, and with this family in particular, times were very hard. This is, Hitler time. He had taken control of the country. There was a lot of poverty, a lot of economic hardship, and, that's where kind of how Hitler was able to take hold of the country. So it was not out of the ordinary. And the Krolls were absolutely affected by what was going on. We had ended World War II, and it was just poverty central. So Joachim's early childhood was pretty grim. His family was very poor. All 11 of them lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment. Things were tight, things were shitty. There was not much real love or attention given to the children. Most of the attention given to them was negative. The father was very physically abusive. I think Joachim and his mother, the mother was not super terrible, but she spread quite thin. And apparently even within his own family unit, Joachim, it's hard to remember how to pronounce it, but Joachim was considered to be kind of the outcast of the family. He did not fit in with his other 8 siblings. They ridiculed him. He was constantly blamed for things and then beaten further. Joachim was also, you guessed it, a bedwetter, which was yet another reason for him to be beaten by his father. So there's no shock that Joachim was not a very well-adjusted child. He went on to have, allegedly, a very low IQ. So most of life was very difficult for him. In school and socially, everything was he didn't excel at all. And it was below average, not even that he wasn't excelling. He was very below mediocre, okay? He was very shy and withdrawn. He was a lonely child with very few to no friends, which of course made him a target for bullying at school. And generally things were very rough for little Joachim. And that's very sad. I definitely feel a lot of empathy for little Joachim, because that sounds awful. As you see in a lot of these cases. And I think his childhood, to me, was far worse than Jeffrey Dahmer's. I'll just say that. Now, Joachim's relationship with his mother was not bad, as I said. She would go on to be the only person that he ever felt he could relate to, the only person to ever really love him. And as I said, this is stretched throughout 9 children, living in poverty in Nazi Germany. So even if she did her best, my God, I don't know. That's a rough situation. When Joachim was a little bit older, like many young German boys, his father made him join the Hitler Youth, hoping that it would turn him into a man. But that did not really go well, because Joachim was not good at things at all, and being a Hitler Youth was no exception. So he was shitty at it, and it was just terrible. Later, when Germany began to lose the war, so we're talking, post 1945, they're starting to lose. The Red Army, which are the Soviets, if you're unaware, came and took control over Upper Silesia and Germany as a whole. And the family kind of repeatedly had to start searching for new places to live. They were kicked out of their home, et cetera, et cetera. So that did not help. And they essentially ended up living in the midst of a war zone, and that was pretty awful. Joachim was surrounded by lots of violence. He saw women being raped. He saw children dying and being killed by explosives, and just all the horrors that we know of World War II, which, let's not just gloss over that. World War II was fucked up. I mean, if you've ever read a book on or watched anything to do with the Holocaust, when I was pregnant with my first child and extremely emotional, my husband made me watch Schindler's List for the first time. I have still not recovered from that, okay? It was horrible. But that is the backdrop of Joachim's life. And I mean, he was a German, so during beginning half, it's not like he was a Jew, but then when the Soviets came, things flipped, right? So not good. So still there was school though, and Joachim ended up dropping out of school by age 15. By age 15, he had only succeeded at going up to grade 4 levels, because he had to repeat grades constantly, because he was just so down. Sorry. He was not good at school or anything really. And then at around 1948-ish, siblings seem to be alive, but the father is now dead. So now we have the mother left with 11 children on her own. And at least one of them is a handful, I'll say. So it's 1948. Things are not looking up for Joachim. And after deciding not to continue his education, he decided to start working on a farm. And I doubt there was a whole lot of choices left for him. That was probably just like what was available to him. But the farm life was also very harsh towards young Joachim. This farm that he was working on, I guess the people there were quite harsh, but also he seemed like he was not good at things, so I'm sure he was kind of fucking up a lot. But whenever he made mistakes, which I assume was very often, he would be beaten as a punishment, so like the beatings are still occurring. And then we have Joachim's issues with women, which are plentiful. You see, often there would be other women working there, as normal workplaces have, and Joachim was super inappropriate with them. He had no idea how to behave around women, not shockingly. He had never been successful with girls. They were generally repulsed by him, and he knew that he really desired to be with women, but he could just never figure out how to make that happen. Yikes. And this resulted in Joachim being very aggressive in his approaches towards women, and women constantly rejecting him. So it was just a cycle of like him being shitty, women being like, ew, and just that's it. I mean, and I think we all know that guy who just like can't seem to behave himself around women. And I think a lot of the time, like I've known a couple people who it's been like, you're like a nice, normal guy, but like you just, like you don't know how to behave around women, and as soon as you get in front of a woman, it's just like, oh, gross. But I think with Joachim, it was like a little more like deep-seated, a little more like I believe that as this pattern continues, it just makes him more and more resentful, and like he's very like incel, you know. If he was born in our time, he would definitely be an incel. So instead of doing any self-reflecting or adjusting his own behavior, Joachim just got down on himself and began to see women as yet another unattainable part of life for him. So, would anyone like to ponder a guess as to which job Joachim excelled at on the farm? Yeah, you got it. Slaughtering the animals. It's said that the first time that he saw an animal being slaughtered, he delighted in the sight of it. Just loved it. Loved the experience, soaked it all up. And I have to assume that in his first experience, he even got a little bit of a sexual thrill out of it, which is so disgusting. It's very fascinating, though. I think that, you know, there's some people who just somehow end up deriving sexual pleasure out of experiences that most people are wired to feel only pure disgust at. Like, to me, the thought of seeing an animal being slaughtered, like, I would do anything to avoid having to see that. I would never, ever want to watch an animal being slaughtered. I would just feel pure disgust and empathy. Like, seeing that, I know, would just make me probably cry and feel like I want to throw up, right? But for him, it's like the opposite. He feels sexual gratification from seeing an animal being slaughtered. And this is like the olden days when it's like, I mean, still, I think watching animals being slaughtered is like probably absolutely repulsive, but like it was like really more engaging. It's like people had to be much more involved in killing an animal than they do now. Like now I'm sure they have like machines to do that kind of shit, but this was like really like slaughtery. I don't know how to describe it, but probably a slower process and a more hands-on process, if you understand what I'm trying to say here. So he loved that. And who does that remind you of? Our boy, Jeff. Yeah, exactly. Are we starting to see some similarities? I think so. So Joachim began to slaughter a lot of animals and really enjoyed every minute of it, loved it. And then, of course, he started to develop sexual feelings towards the animals, and like not just like seeing them being slaughtered, but like towards them. So he began to fantasize a lot about this kind of stuff, and that led teenage Joachim to start having sex with the animals. Cows, pigs, whatever he could get his hands on. And I'm sorry, not sex, rape. He was raping the animals. They did not consent to this. Of course, they are animals. Just foul. So finally, with the slaughtering and the raping of these animals, Joachim finally started to feel some control in his life for the first time ever. He finally got this feeling that he'd been craving, a little sense of control. And that's fucked up, and that is not going to lead to anywhere good, as we know. So Joachim began experimenting. He was killing animals to open them up and see their insides. He loved the way that their warm blood felt on him, the way their organs were shiny, which again, who is this? This is Jeffrey Dahmer. They seem to both, him and Jeffrey Dahmer, have like the same sexual fascination with people and animals' insides and like opening them up, looking at them, touching, feeling their organs. Nasty shit. Apparently, Joachim also began experimenting with smaller animals alone in his apartment, like dogs and cat type shit. He was like killing cats, opening them up, doing that on his own time. So animals were all well and good for Joachim, but he still craved a woman. Joachim would eventually move on from animals to human blow-up dolls. Okay? He couldn't get near an actual woman, of course. So he got a bunch of rubber sex dolls, and he would perform disgusting sexual acts on them. And then, really twisted, he would pretend to kill them. So he would hang them from ropes and pretend that they were an actual human being dying in front of him. And he would stand there and just imagine that he was watching a human being struggle and slowly die and like breathe their last breath. And he loved it. Who does that remind you of? BTK. Yes. So this is not a good situation. As we can see, I do think it's less of a, it seems like less of a, what am I trying to say? Like less of a next step to go from animals to blow up dolls. Like he's killing an actual living thing, and then he's like pretending to kill something. But the step is like closer to a human. So in that sense, it is an escalation. That's the word I was looking for. But it did not stop there. And I bet you guys can guess what he moved on to next. Yes, killing human women and girls. And I will say, be warned, because a lot of his victims are very young. He does end up killing children, which some people are not interested in hearing. I always say that I don't like hearing it, but here I am. I don't know. But yes, so if you don't like listening to people doing awful things to children, perhaps don't finish this. But here we go. So Joachim's world would be turned upside down in 1955 because that is when his mother died. His mother was, as I said earlier, the only person in his life who he felt he could relate to in any meaningful way. So Joachim took her death very badly, and it made him feel completely alone in the world. Like literally, this man has no friends. His family really doesn't give a shit about him. He never got along with his siblings. He doesn't have relationships with them. No friends, no girlfriend. Any animal that he has in his life, he rapes and kills. So this man is very alone. And his mother, bless her heart, was the only person who ever cared about him. So now she's gone. So when this happened, he just went off the rails, and he just started to take his very active and disturbing sexual fantasy life into the real world. So on February 8th, 1955, Joachim, not feeling great, he was out for a walk near the woods, and he ran into 19-year-old Irmgard Strell. Please excuse me, German people, if I am pronouncing these names terribly. But he runs into this girl. She's 19 years old. Joachim makes a pass at Irmgard, who of course, rejected him instantly, like every woman does. And I imagine this wasn't a huge shock to Joachim, but still it must have hit him particularly hard. I think let's pause here for a second and try to like really get into Joachim's head, okay? This man is 22 years old. He's probably very sexually frustrated, as he's never been with a woman in his life. Every woman he's attempted to attract has shut him down. He seems essentially to repel women. On top of that, he has very sadistic sexual fantasies, which he plays out with dolls, who I'm guessing are not really doing it for him anymore. And on top of that, his mother, the only person in the world who treats him like an actual human being, just died. And look, this little explainer is not meant to justify Joachim's actions in any sense. Nothing in the world could justify his actions. Rather, this is just to help understand them, okay? So that is where he is. And that is so when she rejects him, Joachim then makes a decision that takes him from like a loner creep weirdo guy to a murdering rapist. So Joachim, upset with the rejection, grabbed Irmgard, dragged her into the woods, and found a nearby barn that I guess was empty. There, he sexually assaulted her, stabbed her to death. And I've seen a couple conflicting accounts where some say he strangles her, some say he stabs her, but I know that she does get stabbed, so he does have a knife. So I believe that this first death was probably a stabbing, which makes more sense because strangulation is just a lot more intimate, and we'll get to that. But he stabbed her to death and then went on to disembowel her. And now, for those of you who don't know what disembowel means, it means to cut open and remove the insides. So, you know, this is what he's been doing to animals, and he does this to this very young woman. So, like the animals that he enjoyed slaughtering, Joachim enjoyed every second of attacking and killing Irmgard. He felt powerful, he felt in control, and he got a sexual thrill out of this, which was just instantly addicting. And with this first horrific murder, a serial killer was born. And it was not long before Irmgard was found inside the barn, and there was no attempt to cover up the crime scene. She was left there with her organs hanging out, which I'm assuming was a just horrific sight to stumble upon when the person who found her eventually did. Can you imagine? And that was his first incident, and it only got worse from there. Now, it's a bit debated about who his next victim was, because Joachim claimed that he did not kill again for 4 years, but he is suspected of killing multiple women between 1955 and 1959. Those have not been confirmed. So this means he either had a 4-year cooling off period, or he just got right back into it. And unfortunately, we'll probably never know. But those very different scenarios. Somebody who, like, I think it's very common for a lot of people, like for example, the Jeffrey Dahmer case, like he killed somebody and then was like, oh shit, and then like didn't do anything for a number of years. So I kind of feel like that makes more sense to me, that happened versus that he actually continued to kill people right away. But he also had a very inciting incident of his mother dying, so that's like very different, I think, than Jeffrey Dahmer. So I do think either one is possible, but I do lean slightly more towards he had a 4-year cooling off period. I think with a lot of, especially when they're young guys, it's like you're just like waiting to get caught, and then when like 4 years go by and you haven't got caught, you're like, okay, I can do this again. But I'm not sure which one it was. We do know that when he started again, he began strangling his victims to kill them. And like I said before, we didn't know if the first one was strangling or stabbing. But when he starts strangling people, that to me just shows you what an actual violent person this is. Because as I think most of you are probably aware, strangulation is considered kind of the most intimate method to kill a person. It's the most... when you strangle somebody to death, you literally feel the life drain from their body. And unlike movies and TV, strangling somebody is a very long, very tiring process, and it requires actually a lot of strength and stamina, especially if he's like killing, 19, 20-year-old girls. Like these are, it takes a lot, right? I'm sorry to say this, but like if it's strangling like a child, I'm sure is a lot easier than like an able-bodied 20-year-old woman in basically the prime of her life, right? So you see this, I think, with a lot of like very sadistic sexual killers, like BTK, for example. The strangling of somebody is like the thrill of feeling somebody's life leave them. Like that is extremely fucked up, okay? It's also the case that Joachim was having sex with the victims after he killed them. And this is an act known as necrophilia. And it is vile. I'm sure most of you know what necrophilia is, but necrophilia is having sex with dead bodies, basically. I think with a lot of these cases too, he wouldn't rape them before, but he would rape them after they had died. This is again very much like BTK, where it's like he has been so rejected by women, like he like can't even have sex with them while they're alive. He can't even rape them while they're alive. Like he just can't do it. And he has to wait until they're dead, which is so pathetic. Not that it's pathetic that he didn't rape them while they were alive. I'm sure that's kind of better for the victim that they didn't have to endure that while they were alive. But it just shows like the very pathetic mindset, It's just a lot. Just a lot. Anyway, in 1959, Joachim killed and then raped 24-year-old Clara Tesmir, and then Manuela Knott. Manuela was only 16 years old, so that is like you're seeing them get even younger. Manuela and Clara were found with big chunks of their buttocks and thighs missing. Evidently, this is when Joachim began to eat his victims. So on top of rape and murder and necrophilia and the strangulation, Joachim was also a cannibal. Joachim would murder and then rape his victims and then cut chunks of flesh off their bodies to take home and eat later. Joachim continued to murder and rape and defile and eat people for the next 20 or so years, mostly women and girls. But once he did murder a man. Now, this case was August 22nd, 1965. And Joachim was creeping around watching this young couple in their car. This was Herman Schmitz and his fiancée, Marion Veen. And Joachim says that he was watching them. They were having sex in the front seat of their car. And he was watching them lurking about, wishing he was the man probably, and decided that he was up for the challenge of killing a couple. He lured Herman out of the car by pretending to be somebody who needed help, and then he stabbed Herman repeatedly. And then his plan was to attack and rape Marion next, but she was too quick for him. And Marion jumped into the driver's seat of the car and drove right at Joachim, who jumped out of the way just in time, unfortunately. And then Marion sped off looking for help. Now, this was a very close call for Joachim because he had been seen by Marion. And he thought that surely this would be the end for him. But Marion's description, unfortunately, was just not helpful. As we know, eyewitness testimony is often very unreliable. Her recollection was vague at best, and so Joachim was never suspected of this crime, and he just went on his murdering ways. Joachim went on attacking and killing women and girls, and for a man with such an allegedly low IQ, he was pretty methodical about his serial killing. He would often travel out of town and hit up different locations and jurisdictions, and this kept authorities from noticing a pattern and suspecting that one person was responsible for all of these deaths. His victims were mostly women, but they varied quite a lot in ages and looks. He did end up veering younger, but as Joachim would later say that he preferred younger meat because it was more tender. Foul. But like he killed a 61-year-old and he killed, so mostly they were in their like 16 to 24-ish, but there was a man killed in a couple, which is like a completely different MO from killing a 61-year-old woman, which is a completely different MO from killing one 16-year-old girl. And these are all over the country. We're coming off of World War II, so like, what are they focusing on? I don't know. But this, all of these things kind of came together to make it very hard to even identify that it was a serial killer, let alone Joachim. And we'll see later, I'll get into a little bit more of why they didn't figure out that it was him. And so he just went on his ways, and they didn't put it all together. So at this point, he later copped to 14 murders, but we don't know if that's the truth. But so for the 20 years, he's just murdering. And it seems when you look at the timeline of the murders that he's confessed to, it seems like there'll be two very close together, and then a little bit of a cooling off, and then 3 in a year, and then a bit of a cooling off. So it seemed to come in little chunks, unless there's all these ones that we don't know about. It's hard to say. Joachim went on to his final murder in 1976, and absolutely horrifically, this was of a 4-year-old girl named Marion Kettner. Now, Joachim's biggest mistake with this attack was that he abducted a child from his own neighborhood. He had recognized little Marion by sight, and he, I guess, just could not help himself. The sick fuck, okay? 4-year-old girl. When Marion went missing, a huge search party set out to find the little 4-year-old. Police were going door to door. Neighbors were out looking. It was a big deal. She's 4 years old. Now, there are various versions of what exactly happened, but I will tell you what I've pieced together and what came up most often in my research. And you tell me who this reminds you of. So everyone is out searching for Marion, and a neighbor of Joachim's started experiencing difficulties with the plumbing in his apartment, which was next door to Joachim's. I guess he lived in some sort of apartment complex, I think, that had a shared kitchen, it was a kind of rooming house situation. And so this neighbor innocently asked Joachim if he knew what was going on with the pipes. Did Joachim know of anything that could be blocking the pipes, perhaps? And allegedly, Joachim replied with guts. Taking this as a joke, as any normal person would, the neighbor chuckled and went about his day. But then a little bit later, the neighbor went into his bathroom and noticed that in the toilet, there were some tiny, this is very sad, human organs. And I believe we're talking intestines here. And these organs belonged to 4-year-old Marion Kettner. So this man, looked at the tiny organs, put it all together when Joachim had said guts, and was like, oh my God. He was not joking. So he called the authorities right away. When the police came for Joachim, they stumbled into an absolutely disgusting, horrible, terrible, just revolting crime scene. And that was Joachim's apartment. On the stovetop, there was a saucepan with a hand in it. And in the fridge, there was the dismembered body of 4-year-old Marion Kettner. She was cut up into pieces that looked like they were ready to be cooked. And all the pieces that he didn't want, the organs and such, were flushed down the toilet. Hi, Adam Strong. And of course, I'm sure his apartment was just nasty and disgusting elsewhere, as we'll learn about a couple other things that were in there. This was like the Jeffrey Dahmer apartment, blood everywhere, no attempt to clean things up, just enjoyed living in filth and squalor. Whew, gross. So then the police began to interrogate him, and it was hard because he was not smart. He was not admitting to anything. He was just, not cooperating. Joachim was a creepy little fella. He had beady little eyes and a rat-like face, and he looked like a serial killer. I watched a documentary, which I'll link in the source notes, but in this documentary had a lot of the interrogators. I don't know if they were interrogators. Yeah, I think some of them were actually there when they arrested him and interrogated him, and then some who probably heard about it through the police bureau that they're working with. And so they had actual memories of talking to him. But the one detective got the idea to just try to gain Joachim's trust. And I think this is a much more common practice nowadays, but I think back then it was a little less common. Like serial killers were less common, and but this tactic was definitely less common at the time. So he decided that he would just start speaking to Joachim about mundane things. He started asking Joachim about the moped that he knew that he had, that he'd been working on, and just trying to like gain his trust and like treat him like any old guy. And this really worked. Joachim had never been listened to before. Nobody had ever cared about what he had to say. So when the detective played the part of a truly interested conversation partner, somebody who just treated Joachim like a normal human being, Joachim sang like a bird. He was just so excited to have somebody listen to him. He loved it. And Joachim began confessing to his first murder, and then another, and then another, and then another. And he very wrongly got the impression that if he confessed to everything, that he would be sent to a hospital, somehow cured miraculously of his murderous tendencies, and then would be sent home. And I think the police just kind of let him think that. So Joachim admitted to kidnapping, sexually assaulting, dismembering, and eating 4-year-old Marion. Just take that in for a second. A 4-year-old girl, he ate her. And that was not all. In total, Joachim confessed to murdering at least 14 people between 1955 and 1976. The police agreed to take Joachim to the crime scenes and to photograph him reenacting the murder so that they could like find, I think there was nobody that hadn't been found. Actually, I'm not positive of that, but they wanted to get information out of him, so that's what they agreed to do. It was a somewhat unorthodox and very disturbing approach, but an approach that worked. And it did result in some very creepy photos, and I'll have them here. And you can see Joachim is absolutely loving getting to relive all the killings. So I guess you could say it was like a kind of debatably unethical thing to do, but to me, if they're getting information, let him enjoy this. Like, he's going to fucking jail, okay? He's not just going to get to walk off. So let him relive the crime scenes while you get information, and then send his ass to prison. Joachim told investigators that after he killed each woman, he would go home and masturbate with one of his blow-up sex dolls while simultaneously choking a regular children's doll. He was clearly a very sick and very twisted individual. Like, just picture that. Like, that's so many dolls, and like strangling a child is what he's simulating there. As Joachim went on to confess to his murders, the police began to realize something horrible that added yet another layer to this already gruesome situation. Joachim was confessing to murders that they knew to already have been solved, or so they thought. It turned out that there were 2 people sitting in prison for murders that Joachim had committed. And worse still, 3 people who'd been accused of murders committed by Joachim had already committed suicide. The rape and murder of Clara Tesmere had been blamed on a mechanic named Henrik Ott, and he was arrested for the crime and then hung himself while in jail. The rape and murder of 12-year-old Monica Tafel was blamed on a man named Walter Quicker. And Walter was released from prison a few months later when they decided that he wasn't ultimately guilty. But the crime was so heinous, and the whole town still believed him to be guilty, and so he also killed himself. The same thing happened with Adolf Schnickel after he was accused of killing his girlfriend, Ursula Rolling. People in the town did not believe that he was not guilty after he was accused, and that haunted him so much that he killed himself. Yet more victims of Joachim Kroll. Now, the press was very interested in this case as well. So the press dubbed Joachim the Duisburg cannibal killer, or the Ruhr hunter. And Joachim was quoted in the newspaper as saying that he ate his victims and that the only meat he would eat was human meat because it was cheaper. So that really flamed the fire of this whole situation. A lot of things were said in the media that weren't exactly true, or that kind of were, but like were taken out of context, which I'm sure was meant to shock everybody. The media is known to be very trustworthy, so yeah, they were great. They were very helpful. They would say things clearly meant to enrage the public and kind of get the public mad at the police, like that the police were giving him cake whenever he wanted, or that they were taking him to the crime scenes, just like to make people angry at the police that they were like being so nice to the serial killer. But it's like, dude, that's how they're getting their information. Like, give them a break. But this, of course, made Joachim even more hated than he already was, which that's, to me, like, not a problem. What he did was despicable, but it's like, you have to be methodical when dealing with these type of people, and you have to, like, if you give him cake and then he admits to murder, it's worth it, you guys. But anyway, this was a huge case. These murders had been happening with such frequency and were so horrible that everyone was very happy to see somebody go down for them. And I mean, I don't think that they were under the impression that there was a serial killer, right? Like, there's multiple people being accused of these murders, and they were happening all over the place. So like I said before, I don't know that they had put them together, but once they had been put together, it was a huge deal. This is the Jeffrey Dahmer of Germany. Jeffrey Dahmer was a big deal. So there was a trial. Joachim was officially charged with 8 murders, even though he confessed to 14, and many people believe that he even committed more than that. They had a good, solid amount of evidence for 8 of them. On October 4th, 1979, the trial began, and the media covered in detail what happened, and people were shook. Rightly so. When the details came out and people truly understood what this man had been doing, it was absolutely shocking. And, like, imagine, these people had just come out of World War II and seen the atrocities of that. So, like, this is still shocking to them. The trial lasted 2 years with 151 days in court. And in April of 1982, Joachim Kroll was convicted of all 8 murders and sentenced to life in prison. See ya. And on July 1st, 1991, 9 years after his conviction, Joachim died of a heart attack in prison, and he was 58 years old. He died sad and alone, and never having known a true human relationship, never having experienced love and intimacy in the form of a woman, and he died a child rapist, murderer, and a cannibal. That is very sad, but deserving. So that is the story of Joachim Kroll. That is Germany's Jeffrey Dahmer. And that was a horrific story with a lot of victims and a lot of really sick and twisted, horrible aspects. What do you think? I'm very curious to hear of a German perspective, if that's out there. Did you know about this person growing up? Did I get the facts correct? I did a lot of research, but you never know. Especially with these old cases that aren't extremely popular. I think there's a lot of somewhat conflicting accounts, I'll say. But it's not that I feel empathy for him, because I think he was a truly awful person, but like what a awful life, like from start to finish, how truly awful your life must be if that's what you're spending your time doing, which I do think definitely resulted from a horrific childhood. This man is like, he has no redeemable qualities, but his life there's like no point in his life that was like, oh, that was a good time. Like, it was just all awful. So hope this brightened your day. It's like, why the fuck do I like this stuff? I don't know. But you're here too, so I guess you're in the same boat. But anyway, that's the story, and I hope you learned something. I hope you got something out of this horrific story. Please comment below if you have anything to say on this case. If you have any additional details, or if you think I got something wrong, I'd love to know. You can find us here in the comment section. You can find me on Instagram at Who's Knocking Podcast, Twitter at Who's Knocking Pod, email me at hello@whosknocking.com. I also have a newsletter, a weekly true crime newsletter. Covers different true crime content, some new stuff, some old stuff, suggestions and such. It is called Grim Weekly, and you can sign up for that at grimweekly.com. If you do have any troubles with it, email me at madison@grimweekly.com. I have had a couple people who couldn't find the confirmation email or something like that. You do have to confirm via email. I don't really like that, but you have to do it. It's just part of the process. But yeah, that's all from me. Please, you guys, stay safe out there, because you never know who's knocking. This podcast is produced in collaboration with Lost Line Media. Artwork by August Digital. Music by Matthew Cook.